We just talked about thinking fast and slow, and now we're going to go into Power of Habit. Power of Habit is a really cool way to sort of bring this all together because this focuses on how to build processes and habits around the things that are happening that we can't control sometimes, like our subconscious behavior. Now, remember to like and subscribe, make your comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this stuff. And if you want me to do more series like this on these books, and stay tuned for the next video where we talk about the sales call rubric. So let's dive into Power of Habit. Okay, and the last book we're going to talk about is The Power of Habit. This one is probably a little bit more common for people. You might have seen it, but this is really important. The Power of Habit talks about that in our limbic system, there's this thing called the basal ganglia, and that's really the seat of habits. And what I loved about this is that we don't really ever replace habits. They don't go away, but we sort of we override them with better and more powerful habits. And so, the biggest thing is that your brain can't tell the difference between good and bad habits. And the way that they structure this is a very simple formula, which is cue, routine, and reward. And they use that throughout the whole book. And the perfect example they use at the beginning is that they have a mouse that's going up this like T-shaped intersection. And on the left, there's chocolate. And on the right, there's nothing. And so they put the mouse in this thing. There's a door. There's an audible click that happens. And the mouse goes through this maze and finds its way and eventually reaches the chocolate. When it first starts and they first put them in the maze, this click happens and the mouse slowly moves out, works its way around, and eventually finds the chocolate and eats the chocolate. And then they put it back in, and eventually the mouse starts to realize this click is the signal, the cue, the trigger, that then says, hey, I can now go. The routine now goes this way, turn left, and the reward is chocolate. And so that's how the mouse builds this new habit. And the perfect thing that they studied about this is that, let's see if I can find it here. So what they studied that I like is this piece right here on page 16 is the actual statistics or the chart, the graph of how they studied the brain activity in the mouse. And when they first started doing it, the mouse would go in, there's a click, they'd go through the first section, they'd go through the second section, they get the reward, and the brain activity was all over the place because the mouse was trying to figure things out. But once the mouse had built their habits, when the click happened, there was a spike in the brain activity. During the routine, the brain activity was quite low until they got to the reward. And so the reason I want to focus on this book as it comes to sales is if you constantly are trying to wing it or figure things out, you're in that first section where your brain is always going. And you ever feel overwhelmed or stressed or just can't get into that state of flow, that's why that's happening. So I always look at sales process, and I haven't really found a company in the world that I've worked with that you can't really find a way to build an if-then type of a situation where you're starting to go, okay, if this happens, then we do this. When these things go on, we can look at this, whether it's your buyer persona, your segments, the questions they ask, the things they say, the way they do things, the status of their company, whether they're in crisis mode or growth mode, all of these things contribute to going, if then. And so we want to look at what are the cues that we're looking for in our sales conversation so we can build better routines so we can get to our reward, which is better conversations, moving people towards conversions and closing sales. So that's where this comes in really, really powerfully. And so what I try and teach a lot of people is to get better at observing cues and rewards. When this happens, so we can build better and more powerful routines. And when we talked in the last book, Thinking Fast and Slow, that's the combination of understanding your system 1 and 2, being able to get into a state of flow, but bringing in that system 2 as a conscious way to say, now that I see that this happens consistently, I can adjust my process to do these things. The other part is, if you think about how to reinforce this, you can get pride involved. You can use compliments. You can reinforce things. These are all rewards that help people then change their habits. And the other part that we talk a lot about is how to create cravings. When we looked at, this is when we looked at the last book, thinking about this sort of pleasure center in our brain. How do you, in your sales calls or in your team meetings, or when you're working with people that you care about, how do you create different cravings? And we go back, an example that they use in here is a guy named Claude Hopkins, who was part of, I think, Procter & Gamble when Pepsodent first came out, way back when the war was happening, and all of the soldiers were going to war and they had rotten teeth, which was like a risk to national security. And they were trying to convince people because brushing your teeth was an important thing you should all be doing. Nobody listened. But what they did, they brought in this really good ad man called Claude Hopkins, and he found a way to then reinforce the craving, which was that Pepsodent smile, that feeling of this nice smile that they had. And what they did is, what was the cue is, through his research, realized that there's this film on our teeth that's actually part of our membrane that's supposed to be there, that's actually not removed by toothpaste. But the cue was, when you feel that, if you run your tongue across your teeth and you feel that film, that's your signal to brush your teeth so that you can get the Pepsodent smile. So you can see the cue, routine, reward. And Pepsodent went crazy, and they were like, this guy made $1 million from this one ad back in the 40s to be able to drive people to go and buy toothpaste. Another example there, with especially on the craving side, is the Febreze. When you spray air freshener, they were trying to get more people to get rid of bad smells in their house, but nobody wanted to admit that they had bad smells in their house. So they tried and struggled. They almost pulled Febreze as a product completely from the brand because nobody was buying it. But then as they started to study people using it in the wild, they noticed something, that at the time housewives were doing all of their chores. They'd fluff the pillows, they'd get the bed set, and then the last thing they would do was spray Febreze. That was the signal and the reward. And you could see their body language was like, this reward of a clean room. And so that's how Febreze changed their whole marketing and sales message to be, this is the reward of a clean house, that Febreze fresh smell. So instead of saying your house stinks and you need to solve it, this is what you're doing, instead saying, hey, this is the reward of you doing a great job. Now, as it applies to sales, this idea of this craving, this is why I've always been very much against using pain as the motivation to help people make a decision. They always talk about, like, get into the pain, dig down, question, dive into the pain. That works to help understanding where they're coming from. But the real sales motivation can come from understanding what pain is, then going to a reward, creating a craving. That's why we talked in the last book about future pacing. If you do a really good job of helping people say, I want to chase that reward, so you can then bring back that cue to say, hey, if you're feeling like this, if this is happening in your business and these things are going on, what would it take to get you to feel like this? This is the reward for you doing these things, which then reinforce this routine. This also helps us build accountability in our teams. It also helps us get people excited to chase a goal and go and own this new reward. So cravings are really what make cues and rewards work, is that when you start to study the psychology of that reward, in the moment we get the reward, our brain spikes. But as we go through and build that habit, our brain actually spikes right before we get the reward. So during the cue is what is creating the habit. So it's a bit more of a complex psychology. So what you want to do is start to really reinforce that there's a craving, there's a reward, so that people get excited during the cue. So we use this in sales training. So what we do is we look for certain triggers. We look for cues. When somebody says this, we know we're going to be able to get them here. So we identify that, and it gets us excited to take them down a conversational path in these loops that we build, so we can move them to the reward conversation. So, this is really, it's a powerful thing to build the power of habits. And I want you to think how you can apply that in your business, to look at everything that you're doing as a series of cues, routines, and rewards. And that's how we build conversation roadmaps. That's how we build these loops in our sales process. And that's how we build accountability and consistency in our sales meetings. Whoo, okay, so that was the third book down, Power of Habits, really cool. I love this as a methodology to sort of really think how to build your training in any area, especially sales. Now in the next video, we're going to dive into the sales call rubric, which I feel is a very cool tool that you can use to bring all this stuff together and start to apply it in your day-to-day process. We'll see you there. Hey, this is Joe Girard with Change Grow Achieve. Thanks for checking this out. Remember to subscribe and check out some of the other videos and resources we have. You know, as a sales coach, I spend a lot of my time just helping people be less weird and more human with their customers. If we can help you and your high-performing team, reach out to us, let us know, and let's connect soon.